I wonder if it's ever occurred to people why society is the way it is. I mean, why do we have all of these rules? Why do we constantly feel like our place in society is just nothing more than at the beckoning and will of someone else? When you look at our government and the governments of the Western world and that of the Eastern world, it seems like we got lost in translation somewhere. Human beings have come to the decision that now what life is about is working a 9-to-5 job, saving up as much money as they can for that rainy day, yet we can't find ways to actually enjoy our lives. There's a saying that goes that I've been talking about for years, and I heard it from a resident that I used to take care of. My trade for the last nearly 10 years has been a CNA, and I can't tell you how many times I have heard people on their deathbeds tell me the same regrets, and those regrets are always, I wish I would have vacationed more. I wish I would have seen the world. I wish I would have put my time and energy to things that actually mattered. I have never heard someone say, I wish I would have worked more. I wish I had more money in my bank account. Not once have I ever heard that. But you see, there's a reason why humanity has evolved to this stage of society. And I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories or the globalization of all these companies that are owned by 5 or 6 major companies, and even if that's true, it doesn't matter. The problem is, and I speak of this from my opinion, I don't need scientific facts, I don't need scientific data, because scientific facts and scientific data was made up by somebody. Everything that we have around us today, all the words in our language, all the numbers in our mathematics, all of these equations, they were made up by somebody who was trying to understand the environment, nature, the universe, how things work. And the reason why we have these scientific facts and the scientific data is because of our symmetrical brains. We do have symmetrical brains. We think in terms of numbers, we think in terms of boxes, we think in terms of shapes, because that's how we see the world. And for those of you that doesn't think that's true, let me ask you a simple question. In America, at the very least, where I live, when someone needs to identify who you are, it's not good enough to give your name, because the name, by any chance, is not who you are either. Your name was given to you by your parents. It's what people call you. It's not who you are. No, when you have to identify yourself, without a doubt, you have to give a number. You have to give a 9-digit number. And that is your Social Security number. You are marked by a number. And that's not because of some crazy wonky willy-nilly theory about, oh, we're all just numbers, but we are, because that's how our brains work. There was a time in society where there was no society. When we first started, and before I go any further, I can only give you the authority of history such as it is, and that's a very uncertain authority. But I can only use the language that has been given to me, and I can only use the information that has been presented both publicly, privately, what is endorsed by the government, what is demagogued by the government, all the other sources of people having the same ideas, people like Alan Watts, people like Terence McKenna, people like Buddha, people like Jesus, people like Krishna. They all said the same thing. But there was a time when we were hunter-gatherers, when we didn't understand the concept of money or your caste or place in society. There was no such thing as that. We were hunter-gatherers, and that meant that every man and every woman had to be a master of many crafts and many trades. Every man was expected to be an expert hunter, an expert fisherman, an expert maker of tools, clothing. Women were no different. There was no separation between man and woman. Women had just as many responsibilities, if not more. But see, the problem is that we all had many talents. But the way the human brain works, at least in my opinion, is that we can never be too happy for too long. We have to continuously push ourselves and stretch ourselves out into the world to better understand it and find our place in it. We have a gross misunderstanding about what it means to live on planet Earth. You see, we think that we're in control of nature. But that's not the case at all. Nor is nature in control of us. We go together with nature. But when you have a species that has a symmetrical brain, we don't see it that way. We can't see it that way. So one day, these hunter-gatherers decided, you know what, this looks like a good place to stop. Let's build some walls around this river. Let's start farming over here. Let's start herding these cattle. Let's make life easier. And for all intents and purposes, break it down however you want. The simplest version is that's pretty much how it went. Well, then you entered early civilizations. Arguably, the first civilization was the Sumerians. Close behind that was a lot of the Hindu societies in India. But what we did is we created a caste system. We decided to divide humanity into 4 major groups. And those 4 major groups exist today. And those groups are religious, political, commoners, which is also known as merchants, and laborers. Now, unless you own a business, unless you are an archdiocese or a cardinal or a pope, unless you are a senator or a House of Republican, Democrat representative, doesn't matter. You are a laborer. Laborers are the largest caste because they have to be. In order for any society to work, you need a vast number of people that are willing to work and produce and consume and trade, give and take, in a transactional system for all the other castes to even have a position. But you see, the moment we did that, we separated humanity into 4 boxes, and we've been doing it ever since, only we've gotten very sophisticated about it. I want to say that there is no such thing as absolute truth. There is no such thing as scientific fact. And I'll tell you why. Because let's say, for an example, that if you pick up an apple, you throw it in the air, it obeys the law of gravity and comes back down to the earth. That's a scientific fact, right? Well, if you believe in the language and you believe that whoever invented that theory or that law, then yeah, that's true. But you see, that's just exactly what I'm talking about, how we stretch ourselves out and we number everything and we grid everything and we label everything. And because of that, we feel like we have understood. There is no such thing as gravity. Gravity is a word that was invented. There is no such thing as law of gravity. The universe is just doing its stuff, and it doesn't need an explanation. But because of our symmetrical brains, we have to put things in the boxes. We have to understand them. And so, as time progressed, we started creating more and more terms, more and more theories. And then one day, in the early to mid 18th century, a lot of the people that created the so-called laws of nature, well, that stemmed from our theology, especially in the Western world. We are heavily influenced. Even if you're not a Christian, you consider yourself an atheist or an agnostic. There's no way, because you were raised up in a society that has fundamental principles based in Christian theology, whether or not you know it. Because we seem to think, at least in the Christian sense, that the universe was nothing, that was evoked into existence by a celestial king who pushed everything into motion. We have this concept that somebody told nature what to do. And that's where we get the laws of nature. But the sun doesn't rise because it's 6 in the morning. The sun does not rise in the east and set in the west. There is no east, there is no west. There is no north, there is no south. There is no longitude, there is no latitude. The constellations do not exist in the skies. Not really. It only exists because we created a grid. We superimposed ourselves onto the universe. And we created rules and we created laws so that we can understand them. Because we are propelled, we are driven by something called the principle of regularity. A clock is a principle of regularity. It ticks regularly. And through the principle of regularity, we have done amazing things. We're able to predict and dictate different cycles of the moon. And I don't say anything negative against it. It's profoundly a blessing for humans to have this sort of mind, because without this way of trying to dissect things and figure out how stuff works and label things, we wouldn't have Western science. We wouldn't have Western medicine. And in some ways, that has helped us live better lives in terms of longevity, in terms of our energy and our health. But we will go to a point where we will extend lives insufferably. But they're abstractions. Everything that you see around you is an abstraction. It doesn't mean it's not real. If you knock on wood, it's there. But what is wood made of? What is metal made of? What is the earth made of? Well, according to the laws of nature, it's made out of what we call Newtonian mechanics. It's like a game of pool, where through cause and effect, this ball hits that ball, therefore that ball hits this ball. And it can all be traced back to the original source of this ball was the original ball, but that is not how the world works. That is not how the universe works. That is what we call a catenary effect. A prime example of a catenary effect would be if you were to line up dominoes, and then you push that first domino down, it goes cata, 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 cata. That's a catenary effect. One event causes the next. But that's just not how the world is. Yet that is how we have grown up to believe. Because that is based off of Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics is based off of Christianity. There is a divide now where people seem to think that science is out to prove God wrong and Christianity wrong. But what people don't understand is they were one and the same. People like Isaac Newton was God-fearing people, but they got tired of the church telling them what to believe, when to believe, and how to believe it. People like Galileo was ridiculed, demagogued, because he proposed that not only was the sun the center of our solar system and not the earth, but that the earth was round and not flat. He wasn't the only one to propose that. But the Catholic Church crucified, and I don't mean literally like on a cross, they figuratively crucified them. They besmirched their name. They exiled them. They excommunicated these people because they spoke out against what was considered to be the one and only, truly, divinely inspired truth, and that's from the Bible. But you know, most people can't even tell you how we got our Bible. And that's probably for another talk. The problem is that society has gotten to the way it is, with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Because of our brains, the way our brains work, the symmetrical patterning of everything that we do. We have to put things in boxes. We have to put people in boxes. And when I say have to, I don't literally mean that we have to. We just think that we have to. Because that's how our brains work. We have to make sense of everything. So we create words and we create definitions for those words to define other things that have words, that have definitions to those words. But at a certain point, you have to stop and realize, to which words do we use to define something? And by that definitions, to which definitions do those words come from? All words are made up. They're created. When someone says, what's that? Well, I don't know. This looks like a jingamabobber. Well, that sounds like a good word. What does it mean? Well, it's this, this, and this, and it does that. Boom, in the dictionary. And then it becomes almost like it's a fact that the word this means that. And that's how we see things. Except that we can't see the world for what it really is because we are dominated by something called limited consciousness. And it's this very small part of your brain that thinks that it's the entire being. Your limited consciousness is like a radar on a ship. And when this ship goes out, it only pays attention to rocks and other ships, but it ignores the vast amount of space in between. Now, is that space empty? No, it's not. It's full of life. It's full of rocks and other things that are below the ship. A radar is programmed to ping up certain things. And your consciousness is the same way. From the time that you were born, you were taught what was important, what was not important. Between your parents, your peers, your teachers, and even yourself, you were taught to notice only things that are important to you, and you ignore everything else. Because of our symmetrical brains, we have this constant flaw of once we've noticed a constant for long enough, we check it off and say, okay, baby, that one's in the bag. Give me something new. So we tend to focus on the figure rather than the background. When you look at a camera looking out at the woods and you notice the woods, well, you're not going to sit there for hours and just look at the woods. But the moment you see something move across those woods, you immediately say, hey, what's that? That's your limited consciousness. But you can't see. Not really. You know it's there. It's in your peripherals. But it's a constant. But you can't see it. And know that without a background, there would be no figure. They go together. They are not exclusive. They go together like front and back. As a matter of fact, everything goes together like front and back. Because it is a part of a unique system. Instead of things being catenary, there's another way of looking at it called reticulate. And that is that all events are not cause and effect, but interdependent on one another. That one event causing another event is so small, it's not enough. Because there are so many other factors that have to take place at the same time. And if it were not for all of those events, that event may not have happened. There is a way of thinking, and the most popular word for it is the Japanese version. It's called Jiji Muge. And it stems from Buddhism. And it is that it has the idea that everything is the mutual interpenetration of all events and things. Everything is connected. But as human beings, with our brains and the way they're wired, we're almost designed to be asleep. And that's why when people who wake up, I'm going to tell you a secret. Because I have nothing to sell you. I have nothing to tell you that you don't already know. You know. Everything I know, you know. There is no secret to waking up. You either are or you aren't. And of all the people that I have met that have woken up, of all of the famous people that were awakened, people like Buddha. Buddha wasn't a god. Buddha means to be awakened, to be enlightened. It comes from the root word bud, which means to be awake. Jesus was a Buddha. The problem is that we see the world for what it really is. And it's a joke. And that everything that we play, all of these social institutions that we validate with our limited consciousness, they're all games. They're not mere games, but they're games. And the way our brains work, we have learned to think of these games as very serious, because that's the first rule of the game of society, is that this is not a game, this is serious. Now, there are laws. You ought to obey them. Again, that stems from Christianity. I am God, and you are a wretched subject, and you ought to obey me. Because if you don't, you're going to the fire lake of hell. Big Daddy's watching you now. Mind your P's and Q's. It was only inevitable that we came to a level of such sophistication that it's just a matter of time before we blow ourselves up. Being awake sees everything as what it really is. They're abstractions, they're ideas, they're thoughts. You take the word law, something that is in the law books. When someone passes a law, you can't jaywalk, you can't go over so many miles per hour. What is a law? A law is an idea that somebody with enough power, influence, and backing basically said, you know, my opinion of it is that I don't think people should cross the street. I got a buddy who likes to do it all the time. His name is Jay. Let's call it jaywalking. Let's get this on the books, Big Daddy. And it passes, and all of a sudden it becomes a law. It's just someone's opinion. It doesn't really exist.